Mina dragged her exhausted body upstairs on her wedding night. She had spent hours cleaning up after all the guests went home. The moment she opened the bedroom door, her mother-in-law handed her a notebook. "These are Jacob's debts and the debts from the wedding," she said. "The two of you need to figure out how to pay me back." Mina held the notebook in her hands before slowly sitting down on the bed, overwhelmed with exhaustion and frustration. In that moment, she felt as if she had just been deceived. She turned to look at Jacob, who stood there with his head lowered, saying nothing that could protect her, and tears began streaming down her face. Suddenly, she remembered what her mother had once told her. "Mina, think carefully about that family. I have a bad feeling about them." But she had been blinded by love. She ignored her mother's warning and chose Jacob anyway. And now, she was the one who had to face the consequences of that decision. December in Maplewood, Georgia was bitterly cold. Mina stood in front of the mirror one last time, smoothing her white wedding dress that had just finished drying. Her cheeks were rosy, not because of blush, but because of the cold weather. She glanced into the yard and saw Evelyn watering a pot of flowers with her back turned, never looking at her and never saying a word. Evelyn had not spoken properly to her youngest daughter since the two families agreed on the wedding date. Mina was the youngest of three sisters. Lola, the oldest, owned a small neighborhood business, while Jasmine had married and moved to another city. Her two older sisters had always listened to their parents. Mina was the only stubborn one. Evelyn had forbidden her from seeing Jacob for years and tried everything she could, from gentle persuasion to angry arguments. When Mina turned 24, Evelyn no longer shouted. One evening, she called her daughter into the room, sat across from her, placed both hands flat on the table, and slowly said, "If you marry him, then it's as if I no longer have a daughter. Don't ever come back." Even so, Mina still chose to marry Jacob. Now she stood there in her wedding dress, holding the bouquet the groom's family had just given her, her heart sinking as she thought about her mother turning away. When the wedding procession was ready to leave, Mina looked back one last time. Evelyn was still standing by the flowers with her back facing her. Mina bit her lip and walked away. Jacob was the eldest son in a struggling family, and Mina had known him since high school. They had loved each other for 7 years, breaking up and getting back together more times than either of them could count. The more her parents objected, the more tightly she held on to him. Mina often remembered the night she was 19, when her bicycle broke down on a deserted road while she was rushing home because her father was seriously ill. She called Jacob, and an hour later he arrived, took her home safely, then rode back into the night to retrieve her broken bicycle. The next morning he brought it back, exhausted but smiling. "I patched the tire for now. Tomorrow I'll buy a new one and replace it," he told her. Mina treasured that memory like a precious jewel. Every time her mother scolded her or every time she thought about giving up, she remembered that night. A man willing to ride through the darkness for her could not possibly be a bad person. But there were other nights she did not want to remember. Once, when she was 22, Jacob disappeared for 4 days without contacting her. When he returned, he looked thin and exhausted and claimed he had been helping at a friend's funeral. Mina believed him. Another time she left money in a jacket at his house, and when it disappeared, Jacob simply said it must have been lost and promised to repay her. Mina believed him again. Looking back later, she realized there had been things she had seen but had chosen not to see. The wedding celebration at Jacob's house was held under a temporary tent in the yard. By evening, the guests had all gone home, leaving dirty dishes and scattered tables behind. Vanessa glanced at the new bride, then carried her bedding outside to sleep. The younger children drifted away one by one while Mina rolled up her sleeves and went into the kitchen. Nicole walked in, watched her crouching over a basin full of greasy dishes, and simply said, "Wash them quickly. I need to talk to you later." Mina quietly answered, "Okay," and lowered her head. She finished washing the dishes close to 11 o'clock that night. Her clothes were stained with cooking grease, and her hands had turned red from the cold water. She rubbed her fingers together and headed toward the bridal room. As she pushed the door open, she was startled to find Nicole already sitting on the edge of the bed. Nicole gestured for Mina to sit down while Jacob lowered himself beside his wife. A worn black notebook rested on top of the bright wedding blanket. Nicole opened it and pointed to the handwritten entries inside. She explained that the wedding had cost a large amount of money and that most of it had been borrowed. She then added another debt from Jacob's failed overseas work plan and calmly announced that the total would now become the responsibility of the newly married couple. She also said she would take the wedding gold to sell and pay off smaller debts. Mina felt the blood drain from her face. She had known Jacob's family was poor and had expected hardship, but she never imagined that on the night of her wedding, a notebook full of debt would be placed in front of her. She looked at Jacob, hoping he would say something. He kept his head down for a long moment before quietly saying, "Don't worry, Mom. We'll take care of it." Nicole nodded with satisfaction, stood up, and before leaving reminded them not to forget the wedding gold in the morning. After the door closed, Mina sat there as tears streamed down her face. Jacob turned toward his wife and gently put an arm around her shoulders. "Mom has had a hard life. She's thinking about us," he whispered. Mina did not answer. Their wedding night became a sleepless one for her. She leaned against the wall and looked out the window at the pale moonlight resting on the trees outside. Beside her, Jacob had already fallen asleep and was breathing steadily. Before drifting off, he had quietly asked her to understand his mother, who had raised the children alone after his father died. Mina wanted to ask, "Then who will understand me?" But she swallowed the words. She listened to Jacob sleeping and thought about Evelyn, imagining her lying awake at home with her face turned toward the wall. Mina wondered if her mother would open the door if she went back that very night and knocked. She did not know the answer. She had chosen this road herself, and now, no matter how difficult it became, she would have to keep walking to the end. The next morning, Mina woke up at 5 o'clock. She had never gotten up that early before. The sky was still dark as she splashed water on her face, her hands trembling from the cold. In the kitchen, several black cast-iron pots were stacked on top of one another, and she did not even know where to begin. Vanessa got up almost an hour later. She walked past the stove, looked at the pot of porridge simmering over the fire, glanced at Mina, and smirked. "You're making breakfast for the whole family? You're pretty capable, aren't you?" Then she let out a sarcastic laugh and walked outside. By the time the sun rose, everyone was seated at the table. Nicole looked at the plain porridge without saying anything. After breakfast, she turned to Vanessa and Patricia and told them to feed the chickens. Then she looked at Mina. "Starting tomorrow, that job is yours. We raise laying hens here. They have to be fed at 6 every morning. Feed them late and they'll stop laying." The first few days passed with Mina doing everything around the house. Measuring rice, cooking, cleaning, preparing feed, sweeping the yard, and hauling water. Blisters formed on her hands, her shoulders ached, and every night she fell asleep the moment she lay down. On the 4th morning, Mina was feeding the chickens when a neighbor came to visit. Nicole called her inside to make tea. Mina hurriedly prepared it and served the guest before returning to her chores. Around noon, Vanessa casually walked in and said, "One of the hens never got fed this morning." Mina froze for a moment. She had started feeding them but forgotten to finish after being called away. Nicole came outside with a dark expression. "What were you doing? Why didn't you feed the chickens?" Mina quietly explained that a visitor had arrived that morning. Nicole cut her off. "So what? This family depends on those eggs. If a hen skips laying, we lose money." Mina lowered her head and apologized. "I'm sorry. I'll be more careful tomorrow." Nicole showed no sign of softening. "Tomorrow? That hen helps feed this family, and you can't even feed it on time." That evening, after Jacob finished bathing, Mina spoke to him in their room. "I'm exhausted. Your mother scolded me over one chicken. I apologized, but she wouldn't let it go." Jacob sighed and looked at her. "You made a mistake, so Mom got upset. She's only trying to take care of the family." Mina said nothing, but something inside her grew cold. The next morning, while she was sweeping the yard, she overheard Nicole talking with Jacob outside. He repeated exactly what Mina had told him the night before. Nicole immediately shouted, furious that her daughter-in-law had complained behind her back. Mina stood in the yard with the broom slipping from her hands, her face burning with embarrassment as the neighbors heard every word. She learned her first lesson after becoming part of Jacob's family. Not everything could be shared with her husband. After taking several days off for the wedding, Mina returned to her garment factory job. A few weeks later, she realized it was impossible to keep going. The pay was low, the commute was long, and she still had to handle all the cooking and housework after coming home. She thought it through carefully and finally spoke to Jacob. She wanted to use the savings she had left and borrow a little more from Lola to open a small hair salon. She had learned hair washing and hairstyling while working in the city and believed all she needed was a place to rent. Jacob thought for a while before nodding. If it brings in money, it'll help pay off Mom's debts. 2 weeks later, Mina's tiny salon opened its doors on a corner of the local shopping district. The salon had only one large mirror, 2 swivel chairs, an old shampoo basin, and walls decorated with hairstyle pictures cut from magazines, but customers still came. Women from the neighborhood stopped by for inexpensive hair washes and trims, and Mina's skill and friendly manner slowly earned their trust. Every morning, she woke early to cook for Jacob's family before heading to the salon. At noon, she grabbed a simple meal, and every evening she returned home to prepare dinner, wash clothes, and finish the housework before collapsing into bed. Jacob rarely helped except for occasionally transporting supplies. Within a few months, Mina looked noticeably thinner and exhausted, her hair unkempt, and her clothes carrying the scent of shampoo mixed with sweat. Even then, Nicole was never satisfied. At dinner, she complained that the soup lacked flavor, criticized the meat for being too dry, and accused her daughter-in-law of not taking proper care of the household. Mina simply lowered her head and quietly accepted every word. One day, Mina realized she was pregnant. For several weeks, her period had been late, but she had been so busy working and worrying about her husband's family that she assumed it was nothing unusual. It was not until she started feeling nauseated every morning while preparing animal feed that she became suspicious. She left work early that day and stopped by a pharmacy near the shopping district to buy a pregnancy test, slipping it into the bottom of her bag before riding home. At 4 o'clock the next morning, while everyone else was still asleep, she crept into the bathroom behind the house and opened the package with trembling hands. 2 minutes later, 2 bright red lines appeared under the dim light. She slowly sat down on the concrete floor, one hand resting on her stomach and the other covering her mouth, unsure whether she felt joy or fear. Mina remained there until she heard the first rooster crowing in the distance. She hid the test in her pocket, splashed cold water on her face, and went into the kitchen to prepare breakfast as usual. While wiping down the stove, she suddenly felt sick and rushed outside, vomiting by the well. A neighbor passing by smiled and joked that she must be expecting. Mina blushed without answering. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she quietly told Jacob the news. He simply nodded and said, "All right, we'll tell Mom tomorrow." The next morning, after hearing she was going to have a grandchild, Nicole did not smile or show any excitement. She only asked how far along the pregnancy was and whether Mina had seen a doctor yet. When Mina finished explaining, Nicole replied in an even tone, "Take care of yourself if you're pregnant, but that doesn't mean you stop working. The salon is still there." The pregnancy was extremely difficult. Almost everything Mina ate made her vomit, even water, and she lost so much weight that her face became hollow. Even so, no one took over her responsibilities. She still woke at 5 every morning to cook, opened the salon at 6, grabbed a quick meal in the afternoon, and returned home each evening to prepare dinner. Sometimes the nausea became so severe that she could barely stand, and customers told her to go home and rest, but she could not afford to close the salon for even a day. After losing several pounds during the first 3 months, she finally spoke to Jacob one night. "Maybe we should rent a small place of our own. I can't keep doing this anymore. It would be closer to the salon, and I wouldn't have to travel so far every day." Jacob stayed silent for a long time before answering, "I'm not leaving. My mother lives here. If you want to go, you can tell her yourself." The next morning, Mina brought up the subject with Nicole while she was sorting vegetables. Nicole gave a faint, dismissive smile. "If you want to leave, then leave. I won't stop you. But my son stays here." Then her tone became even colder. "As for that salon of yours and everything inside it, not until I've gotten back what this family spent. As far as I'm concerned, it belongs here now." Mina stared at her in disbelief. "Mom, the salon was built with my money and a loan from my sister." Nicole did not budge. "Whether it was yours or your sister's, it became part of this household. If you walk out that gate, you take only your clothes. Everything else stays." Mina lifted her eyes and looked toward Jacob. He was sitting in the corner of the yard, shaving a bamboo stake, never once turning to face her. She understood that if she waited until the next day, Nicole might even send someone to clear out the salon. Without saying another word, Mina stood up and walked straight toward the front gate. Vanessa had borrowed her old sedan weeks earlier and never returned it, leaving Mina with no choice but to continue on foot. Mina walked straight to the shopping district and called Lola. The 2 sisters loaded everything from the salon onto an old pickup truck they had borrowed from someone they knew. hair dryers, mirrors, chairs, and the shampoo station. They temporarily stored everything at Lola's house before Mina returned to Jacob's family home to collect her clothes. As soon as she reached the front gate, she heard Nicole yelling from inside. She's only been in this family a few months, and she already dares to move the salon out on her own. What an ungrateful daughter-in-law! Mina did not answer. She went into the bedroom, packed her clothes into a fabric bag, and left behind the wedding outfits she had worn only a short time before. The black notebook of debts was still lying on the bedside table. She glanced at it once and walked away. Jacob sat on the front steps with his head lowered. He did not ask her to stay, did not stand up, and did not even look at her. Mina adjusted the bag on her shoulder and walked past him toward the gate while Nicole shouted after her, "Then leave! Don't ever come back!" Mina went back to Evelyn's house. By the time she arrived, the afternoon sun was beginning to fade. Evelyn was sweeping dry leaves in the yard. She looked up at her daughter for a brief moment before lowering her eyes and continuing to sweep. Mina stood outside the gate, unable to step inside. "Mom," she called softly. Evelyn did not raise her head. "What is it?" Mina swallowed hard. "My mother-in-law threw me out. Could I stay here for a little while?" Evelyn stopped sweeping and looked at her daughter for a long time. Her eyes reddened, but her voice remained cold. When a woman gets married, she follows her husband. If she's sent back to her parents' house, what kind of life is that? Go! Tears rolled down Mina's face. She turned around and slowly walked away while Evelyn remained standing in the yard, silently gripping the broom. She returned to Lola's house, where her sister was organizing the salon equipment they had moved earlier. The moment Lola saw her, she set down what she was doing, led Mina inside, and told her to sit while she prepared something warm to eat. Mina lowered herself onto the front step, wrapped her arms around her still flat stomach, and finally broke down after holding back her tears all day. That night, she slept in the living room on a simple wooden daybed because Lola's small home had only 2 bedrooms. She lay awake, listening to the quiet sounds of the house and thought about how she had once had a home and a family who loved her, only to lose everything. The next morning, Lola handed her an old maternity outfit she had worn during her own pregnancy. Mina put it on and looked at herself in the mirror. Only a few months earlier, she had been a bride in her wedding clothes. Now she was a pregnant woman depending on her sister's kindness. A few days later, Mina reopened the salon in its old location. This time, she worked completely alone. She carried equipment by herself, changed the water herself, and greeted every customer without anyone to help. Regular clients felt sorry when they saw her pregnant and struggling, urging her to slow down, but she always smiled and insisted she could manage. From 6 in the morning until 7 at night, she washed hair, cut hair, styled hair, and served one customer after another. Every evening, she tried to give Lola a small amount of money for meals, but Lola always slipped it back into her pocket and told her to save it for the baby instead. One hot afternoon in June, after working since early morning without eating lunch, Mina suddenly felt dizzy. She sat down, hoping to rest for a moment, but her vision darkened before she could recover. Gloria, who ran a seafood stand nearby, noticed Mina collapse over the counter and rushed across immediately. Shaking her shoulder in alarm, she heard Mina whisper weakly, "I'm so hungry." Gloria hurried away and returned with a bowl of hot noodle soup, setting it in front of her. "Eat first," she urged. "You're pregnant. Why are you pushing yourself like this?" Mina ate quickly until she regained her strength. Gloria watched her with concern before saying she had seen her working from morning until night with almost nothing to eat, and promised that from then on she would make sure Mina had lunch every day, whether she could pay or not. When Lola heard what had happened, she was furious. She demanded to know whether Mina had been going to regular prenatal checkups. After hearing that she had not, Lola insisted on taking her to the clinic the very next day. The doctor performed an examination and told them that the baby boy was developing normally but was smaller than expected because Mina was not eating enough and needed better nutrition. Mina quietly held Lola's hand as tears filled her eyes. As the pregnancy reached its 8th month, she still returned to the salon every day. Customers often urged her to go home and rest, but she continued working. People around town talked about her situation, some with sympathy and others with ridicule. Nicole never visited even once, and Jacob never came either. One evening near the end of July, Mina was closing the salon when she sensed someone standing behind her. She turned around and saw Jacob. He looked thinner than before, his face darkened with exhaustion. Without saying a word, he held out a bag of oranges. "Eat these. They'll be good for you." Mina glanced at him and turned away without taking the bag. Jacob stood there awkwardly, twisting his hands together before saying, "I know I was wrong. I didn't stand by you. I failed you." Mina fought back her tears and answered without looking at him, "I don't blame you. Just go home." Jacob remained there for a long moment, unable to find anything else to say. In the end, he placed the bag of oranges on a chair in the corner of the salon and silently walked away. A few days later, he returned. This time, he brought nothing with him and stayed outside the doorway. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I rented a small apartment in an old building near downtown. If you're willing, come live there with me. Let me make things right for you and the baby." Mina looked at him and thought about the child growing inside her. That child deserved to have a father. She slowly nodded. Jacob let out a long breath, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted from his shoulders. The following week, they moved into the small apartment, barely large enough for the two of them. The walls were stained with age, and parts of the roof leaked, so Jacob climbed up and repaired them himself. Mina bought a few basic household items, a pot, a small gas stove, and some dishes. And together they created a simple home of their own. Jacob also began helping at the salon. He did not know how to wash or cut hair, but he carried water, prepared things before opening, cleaned up at the end of the day, and welcomed customers when they arrived. People who visited the salon smiled when they saw him. Mina smiled politely but remained cautious. The hurt from being driven out of his family's home had not disappeared. After a few peaceful weeks, she quietly told him one evening, "I'm still planning to repay your mother's debt a little at a time every month. But promise me you won't let her come interfere with my life again." Jacob squeezed her hand and replied, "I promise." At the end of October, the day Mina had waited for finally arrived. She was at the salon when labor pains began to come one after another. A customer noticed her clutching her stomach in pain, and soon Lola and Jacob were contacted. Gloria hurried over to help keep Mina calm while Lola rushed her to the county hospital. Jacob grabbed the hospital bag they had packed the week before and drove there as fast as he could. Mina remained in labor throughout the night, gripping Lola's hand and whispering through the pain. Just before dawn, the cry of a newborn baby filled the delivery room. A nurse carried out a baby boy and announced that he was small but healthy. Jacob looked at his son and tears streamed down his face. It was the first time Mina had ever seen him cry. When she finally looked at her husband, she said, "You should name him." Jacob stared at the baby for a moment before answering, "How about Bob?" Mina smiled gently and nodded. Bob. Nicole did not come to the hospital after hearing that her grandson had been born. It was not until Bob was 10 days old that she finally stopped by the apartment. She stood outside the door without stepping in and simply called out, "So the baby's here?" "A boy, right? As long as both mother and child are fine, that's good." Then she turned around and left without asking another question or holding her grandson even once. Mina remained on the bed with Bob in her arms and said nothing. After walking his mother to the door, Jacob came back inside and sat beside his wife. Trying to comfort her, he quietly said, "For Mom, this is already a lot. At least she came." Mina did not respond. She simply lowered her eyes and looked at Bob sleeping peacefully in her arms. After staying home with the baby for a month, Mina told Jacob she wanted to reopen the salon because she was afraid customers would forget about her. Jacob hesitated before saying that she should stay home with Bob while he learned to manage the shop himself. He admitted he did not know how to wash hair, but he was willing to learn little by little from Mina's friends who often visited. Mina thought about it for a while and realized he genuinely wanted to help, so she agreed. The next day, Jacob learned how to unlock the salon, prepare the wash stations, and recognize the different products. On his first full day running the business alone, he came home carrying the day's earnings. Many regular customers had continued coming simply because they knew he was Mina's husband. Mina happily embraced him and carefully placed the money into the small wooden box by their bed. Nearby, baby Bob slept peacefully in his crib. That night, for the first time since giving birth, Mina slept soundly. On the second day, Jacob brought home $300. On the third day, he handed Mina $200. On the fourth day, only $100. Mina asked, "Why has it been less every day?" Jacob scratched his head and replied that business was slow because of the rain and fewer people were coming to the salon. Mina simply nodded and said nothing more. A week later, he came home with only $50, claiming that just one customer had come in all day. This time, Mina frowned. She remembered that even on an ordinary weekday, the salon usually had several customers besides people coming in for haircuts and coloring. $50 could not explain where the rest of the money had gone. She did not question him, only turned away to hold baby Bob. A few days later, one of her regular customers stopped by the apartment and casually asked why the salon had been closed for several afternoons in a row. Mina was stunned. After the woman left, she sat beside Bob's bed and placed a hand on her forehead. If Jacob had not been at the salon, then where had he been going every day? 2 days later, Jacob told Mina he was taking a broken hairdryer to a repair shop near the highway. After he left, Mina brought Bob to Lola's house and asked her to watch the baby for a little while. She then hired a local driver to follow the same direction Jacob had taken. Along the way, she searched every roadside cafe and small business but could not find him. Finally, she asked the driver to turn down a narrow side road leading toward a neglected area by the river. Before long, she spotted a familiar red motorcycle parked outside an abandoned building. It belonged to Jacob. Mina paid the driver, walked forward alone, and pushed aside the hanging tarp covering the entrance. Inside, beneath the broken roof, she saw Jacob sitting against the wall with bloodshot eyes. Around him were unmistakable signs that told her everything she needed to know. He had gone back to his old addiction. Mina hurried away without saying a word. By the time she returned to the apartment that afternoon, she had already picked Bob up from Lola's house. Lola noticed something was wrong and tried to ask questions, but Mina only answered that she had found Jacob and said nothing more. Back in the apartment, she laid Bob on the bed and quietly sat beside him, staring at the stained wall in front of her. She thought about the 7 years they had spent together, the notebook of debts on their wedding night, the bag of oranges Jacob had carried to her salon, and the expression on his face when she found him in the abandoned building. She did not cry. She simply sat there, unable to decide what she should do next. Around 9 that evening, Jacob finally returned. He stood at the doorway without daring to step inside. Mina gently laid Bob's bottle on the table and looked at him with unexpected calm. "Come in!" Jacob entered with trembling legs and silently sat down when she told him to. Without looking at him, Mina asked, "How long have you been addicted?" Jacob lowered his head and admitted that years ago, while working away from home, a friend had introduced him to drugs. He had become addicted before their marriage, but managed to quit for about a year before the wedding. After Mina left to stay with Lola, he fell back into the habit and could not stop again. Mina listened before asking where all the money she had trusted him with had gone. Jacob answered in a barely audible voice, "It's gone." Jacob suddenly dropped to his knees and clung to Mina's legs. It was the first time she had ever seen him kneel before anyone. Through tears, he begged her not to leave him and pleaded for one more chance, promising that he would lock himself inside and quit on his own if she would only help him. Mina looked down at him and noticed strands of gray beginning to appear at his temples. After a long silence, she rested a hand gently on his head and said, "Stand up. I'm not leaving you." Then she looked directly into his eyes and asked one final question. "Can you really quit?" Jacob nodded desperately. "Lock the door. Don't let me go outside. Let me stay in the back room. Just give me one chance." Mina planned to lock Jacob inside their apartment and help him quit on his own, but Gloria immediately stopped her. "Have you lost your mind? People can die trying to quit alone. Some have seizures. Some never make it. You need to get him to a treatment center." Mina could not afford a private facility, so Gloria told her about a county-supported recovery program. Mina took Jacob there. He stayed for 2 weeks under medical supervision while nurses monitored his condition and helped ease the withdrawal symptoms. Every day, Mina brought him meals. Sometimes she found him curled up on the bed, drenched in sweat. Other times he leaned silently against the wall with his eyes shut, struggling through the pain. At the end of the 2nd week, a nurse called Mina to pick him up. Jacob walked out looking painfully thin, hugged his wife, and whispered, "I did it. I quit this time. I promise." Mina did not answer. She simply held him tightly, torn between hope and doubt. For a while, Jacob appeared to stay clean. He helped at the salon again and handed every dollar he earned to Mina. Then, a little more than a month after he returned home, Mina discovered she was pregnant for the 2nd time. Bob was not even crawling yet. She stared at the 2 bright lines on the pregnancy test in the shared bathroom and said nothing to Jacob. Instead, she waited until the weekend and showed it to Lola. The moment Lola understood, her expression darkened. She urged Mina to end the pregnancy, warning that raising another child with a recovering addict would only bring more hardship. Mina rested a hand on her flat stomach and shook her head. "I won't do that. This baby hasn't done anything wrong." Mina still chose not to tell Jacob about the pregnancy. She wanted to be certain he had truly changed. About 3 weeks later, he began coming home late again and leaving early without going to the salon. This time, Mina kept the salon earnings with Lola instead of handing them to her husband. One evening, Jacob sat down on the edge of the bed, his eyes bloodshot and his hands trembling. "Give me some money," he said. Mina looked at him and immediately understood. Calmly, she replied, "I don't have any." Jacob insisted that she go get it, but Mina refused. Suddenly, his expression changed. He grabbed her sleeve and yanked hard. Bob was startled awake and burst into tears. Mina stumbled backward, hit the cabinet, and quickly picked up her son. Looking straight at Jacob, she said with a shaking but determined voice, "Leave. Get out of this house." Jacob refused to leave. Instead, he tore through the apartment, emptying drawers and throwing clothes, baby blankets, and diapers across the floor in search of money. Finding nothing, he shouted in anger while Mina fled with Bob to Lola's house. That night, he sold the television, the old music player, the rice cooker, and anything else he could carry away. After that, whenever he returned, he demanded money. If he found none, he smashed whatever remained or took his anger out on Mina. By the 4th time, Mina stopped running. Holding Bob close, she whispered, "Mom's not going to run anymore, sweetheart. We have nowhere left to run." Late one rainy night, Jacob burst into the apartment demanding money once more. When Mina refused, he dragged her outside into the shared courtyard despite Bob's terrified cries from inside. Rain soaked the brick ground beneath their feet. Mina struggled to stand and pleaded with him, "Wake up. I'm pregnant. I'm carrying our 2nd child." Jacob paused for only a second before laughing bitterly and accusing her of carrying another man's baby. Mina stared at him in disbelief. Then he shoved her with force. She stumbled backward and slammed into the concrete edge of the old well. A sharp pain shot through her body. She doubled over, clutching her stomach, unable to speak. In that instant, she knew something terrible had happened. Bob's cries echoed through the night as neighbors rushed outside. The community leader ran over, helped Mina to her feet, and called for an ambulance while others carried Bob to safety. At the hospital, the doctors tried everything they could. After the examination, a doctor came out and quietly said to Lola, "We couldn't save the baby. The impact was too severe." While Mina recovered in the hospital, the community leader gave a full statement to local police, describing not only the attack but also the repeated violence, property theft, and suspicious people Jacob had been bringing around. 3 days later, officers raided the abandoned riverside gathering place and arrested 6 individuals, including Jacob. When Lola told Mina the news, Mina closed her eyes and 2 tears rolled slowly across her face. Mina remained in the hospital for 3 days. Lola stayed with her while Gloria visited, carrying food and comforting words. Jasmine called from another city, crying over the phone because she could not travel with her own young child but sent money to help with Mina's recovery. Listening to the voices of the people who still cared for her, Mina realized that even after losing so much, she was not completely alone. Gloria gently held her hand and told her not to give up. Mina managed a faint smile. "I'm not giving up," she whispered. "I just feel like a part of me is gone." On Mina's 2nd day in the hospital, Evelyn finally came to see her. When Lola had first called with the news, Evelyn had simply collapsed onto the front steps of her house, unable to say a word. She stayed there until morning without eating or going inside. Around noon the next day, she finally asked Lola to take her to the hospital. When she entered the room, she said nothing. She sat down beside Mina's bed and gently took her daughter's hand. Her wrinkled fingers were still rough from years of hard work. Mina looked at her mother without knowing what to say. Ever since she had insisted on marrying Jacob against Evelyn's wishes, an invisible wall had stood between them. At last, Evelyn spoke first, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Just rest. I'll go home and take care of Bob for you." Mina could no longer hold back her tears. "Mom," she whispered. Evelyn leaned down and embraced her, patting her back the way she had when Mina was a little girl with a fever. On the day Mina was discharged, she did not return to the apartment. Lola and Evelyn brought her back to her childhood home. Sitting in the car with Bob asleep against her chest, Mina gazed out at the fields stretching into the distance. Meanwhile, the salon remained closed, and Gloria kept the key for her. Every morning, Gloria swept the floor herself so dust would not settle over the equipment, and reminded Mina to focus on recovering because the salon would still be there when she was ready to return. Even after coming home, Mina could not sleep through the night. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw the edge of the well in the rain. Whenever Bob cried, she imagined the baby she had lost crying somewhere too. One day, while hanging laundry outside, she instinctively rested a hand on her stomach and froze when she felt how flat it had become. 10 days after Mina returned home, Gloria rode over to tell her new information about Jacob. She explained that he had been arrested together with 5 others, and that the community leader had been gathering evidence against the group for a long time before finally reporting them after the night Mina was attacked. People believed Jacob would likely receive a lengthy prison sentence. Mina slowly sat down on the front steps. She was not surprised by the news. Instead, she felt as though a heavy stone that had long weighed on her chest had finally been lifted. Gloria gently asked whether she planned to visit him. Mina lowered her eyes and answered, "Not yet. I need more time to think." That night, Mina lay beside Bob in the bedroom where she had slept as a young woman. She thought about the 7 years she had loved Jacob, their wedding night, the rainy night by the well, and the child who never had the chance to call her mom. Then she quietly sat up, opened the old wooden drawer, took out paper and a pen, and placed them beneath the light. Although her hand trembled, each stroke remained steady and clear. She was writing a divorce petition. When Nicole learned that Mina had filed for divorce, she eventually went to see Jacob at the detention center. Sitting across from her son, she immediately told him to demand half of the salon in the divorce proceedings. Jacob lifted his head and replied, "The salon belongs entirely to Mina. I never contributed a single dollar to it. I even spent her money." Nicole slammed her hand on the table and argued that a married couple shared everything. Jacob lowered his head again, remained silent for a long time, then finally whispered, "All right, I'll sign." Later, the court rejected the request after reviewing documents, proving that the salon had been built with Mina's savings and money borrowed from Lola. After hearing that the court would not divide the salon, Nicole became furious. Early the next market day, she brought Vanessa and her youngest son to the salon while Mina was washing a customer's hair. Standing outside, Nicole shouted that Mina had abandoned her husband and stolen everything for herself. Mina calmly set down the water pitcher, asked her customer to remain seated, and walked to the entrance. Nicole demanded half the salon. Mina answered in an even voice, "The salon is mine. I paid for it with my own money and a loan from my sister. The court has already decided." Nicole ignored her words and motioned for her youngest son to grab one of the hair dryers. Mina stepped in front of the doorway and firmly warned him not to touch it or she would call the police. Just then, Lola hurried over carrying the shoulder pole she normally used at her grain business. She planted it on the ground with a loud thud and confronted Nicole face to face, accusing her of raising a son who had abused his wife, become addicted to drugs, and caused Mina to lose her child. Nearby vendors gathered around, and Gloria stepped forward to support Mina, reminding everyone that Nicole had never even held her own grandson but had now come to fight over property. As more people joined in, Vanessa lowered her head in embarrassment and urged her mother to leave. Finally, Lola warned Nicole that if she remained any longer, the police would be called for causing a public disturbance and attempting to take property by force. Surrounded by dozens of watching eyes, Nicole angrily walked away with her children. Mina returned inside the salon, where her customer was still waiting with shampoo foam in her hair. Without another word, Mina calmly resumed rinsing and washing as though nothing had happened. A week later, Mina visited Jacob at the detention center one last time. He looked even thinner than before as the guards brought him into the visiting room. Through the metal barrier, Mina quietly placed a paper bag on the table. "There are some warm clothes in here. Winter's coming. Wear them so you won't be cold." Jacob looked at the bag, his eyes turning red. "You still remember me?" Mina answered calmly, "I don't. I'm only doing the last thing I owe as your former wife. After today, I won't come back again." Jacob covered his face and cried. It was the first time Mina had ever seen him truly cry. Not to beg for forgiveness, but because he finally understood what he had lost. Mina stood up, adjusted her knit hat and scarf, and said one last sentence without looking back. "Take care of yourself in there, and don't come looking for me again. Bob and I have nothing to do with you from today on." Nearly 2 years later, Mina moved her salon from the old market into a small storefront on the town's main street. The business now had a proper sign, 2 assistants, and even offered nail services. Every month, she set aside money to repay Lola for the loan that had helped her open the salon. Lola refused to accept it, but Mina quietly slipped the cash into a drawer anyway. By the 8th month, She had completely repaid the loan. That day, the two sisters sat together at a small restaurant celebrating over bowls of noodles. Lola smiled and said, "You've paid it all back. From now on, it's your money." Mina smiled and replied, "It belongs to Bob and me." Customers from the old neighborhood continued following Mina to the new salon. Evelyn sold her small stall and moved in with her daughter to help care for Bob. By then, the little boy was almost 3 years old. He could run, call for his grandmother, and call for his mother, his chubby cheeks and bright eyes reminding Mina of Jacob when he was younger. One afternoon, Mina looked at herself in the salon mirror. She was 27 now. Her hair was still long, and traces of hardship remained on her face, but the light had returned to her eyes. She no longer saw the young bride crying on her wedding night. She saw a woman who had survived a very long journey. One cold December afternoon, Mina closed the salon early and rode her new electric scooter with Bob to visit Lola's grain shop. Lola handed Bob an apple, making the little boy grin from ear to ear. Later, they stopped by Gloria's seafood stand. As soon as Mina lifted Bob down, he ran happily into Gloria's arms. Standing in the middle of the busy market, surrounded by the familiar smells of fish, vegetables, and roasted sugarcane, Mina took a deep breath. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she was standing firmly on her own feet today. Looking around the market, Mina reflected on everything she had lived through. Sometimes, she thought, a person had to endure a very long storm before learning to treasure the sunshine afterward. She had survived that storm. Now her life belonged to herself, to Bob, and to the aging mother who had once turned her away at the gate, but later held her through the greatest pain of her life. As for Jacob, he would spend the coming years serving his sentence and carrying another punishment that no court could erase. The memory of the child who would never have the chance to call him Dad. The afternoon light slowly faded as a flock of sparrows flew across the rooftops and settled into the old trees nearby. Mina lifted Bob onto the scooter and carefully adjusted his warm hat. Lola waved from behind and called out for them to come by again soon. Mina smiled, waved back, started the scooter, and rode away. Behind her, the red December sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky with the colors of a quiet ending and a hopeful new beginning. Mina once gave up everything for love. She chose to marry Jacob, hoping they would build a warm and lasting home together. But no matter how hardworking, determined, or patient she was, she eventually had to walk away because she could no longer stand beside a husband who had fallen back into drug addiction and forgotten the commitment and loyalty he owed to his wife and family. Choosing to marry Jacob despite her parents' objections does not necessarily make Mina deserving of blame. They had spent many years together, getting to know each other and building a relationship, and she fought bravely to protect the love she believed in. Even after Jacob went down the wrong path, she stayed by his side and struggled alongside him in an attempt to save their family. In the end, however, Jacob did not have the strength or determination to overcome his addiction. As a husband, he failed to protect his wife from the hardships and unfairness she faced within his own family. As a man, he lost his sense of responsibility and dignity, dragging his wife and child into a life of suffering. At that point, Mina's efforts to keep the family together no longer had any meaning. She chose to leave and rebuild her life, while Jacob had to bear the consequences of his own actions. Life can be unfair at times, but in the end, truth and justice have a way of finding their way back. As for Evelyn, she had experienced enough in life to understand what the right choice looked like. She tried to warn Mina from the very beginning because she sensed that something was not right about Jacob's family, but Mina refused to listen. And perhaps that is understandable. When people are deeply in love, they often become blind to the warning signs around them. Even though Evelyn was angry with her daughter, Mina was still her child. In the end, no one loves a child quite like their own mother. If Mina had listened to Evelyn, her life might have turned out very differently. But once you make your own choice, you must also accept responsibility for it and find the strength to overcome the obstacles that come with the path you have chosen.